Keegan here, and welcome back to another episode of The Modern Working Musician. My guest this week is Mr. Ben Ricketts. Ben is what could be described as a local Memphis music legend. He's been on the scene for quite some time, and he's also probably one of the hardest working people I know. He pretty much fits the mold of what it means to be a DIY musician. He writes and records all of his own music, releases it by himself, books and promotes all of his own tours, and just kind of does everything that a DIY musician does to an excellent degree. Not only that, Ben is probably one of the wisest people I've ever sat down to have a conversation with. Pretty much every word that falls out of his mouth is nothing short of profound. So it was really awesome to just kind of get to know him, as well as talk about what makes him tick. Also, at the time that we are releasing this episode, him and his new wife, Hannah, just got married yesterday. So congratulations to both of them. I wish you both nothing but happiness. That's so cool. And then last but not least, if you are interested in supporting us, you can go to patreon.com/KeeganPaluso. For any behind the scenes extra features, fireside chats, our weekly Patreon only exclusive episodes, all of that stuff is available for you at patreon.com/KeeganPaluso for $5 a month. Thank you so much. And without further ado, please enjoy this very amazing conversation with Mr. Ben Ricketts. I do have to go to bed at some point. That's it.
Oh, same
We
here.
got to go to work tomorrow. All right. So, welcome back to another episode of The Modern Working Musician. My guest this week is Mr. Ben Ricketts.
Hi.
Ben is, you could call, I think it's safe to call you a local music legend in Memphis.
I don't want to go that far yet.
Yeah, but you are kind of like a phantom. Like, your name just like, you hear your name on the wind. If you're like playing music in Memphis, like Ben Ricketts. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know. I mean, I stayed so busy for a long time. I mean, I've been doing this since I was 15, and it's just gotten gradually busier and busier. And because I grew up in a small town where there wasn't really anything, if you wanted to play somewhere, you called somewhere and said, "Can I set up in the corner of your restaurant and play music or whatever?"
Gotcha.
And so when it came to me having venue contacts and other bands and things, I don't know. I'm more open to being asked to play now, but there for a while I didn't wait around for it. It's like if I wanted to play, I called it. So like I realized that I was working and playing a lot, and I think that just naturally, like, you know, people, once you see a name on so many flyers or
Yeah.
you hear so many people say, "Oh, well, I saw so and so at this show," or what, you know, I guess it flies out that way.
That's cool, man. Yeah. 'Cause, I mean, that's one thing I've noticed about just being Facebook friends with you for such a long time too. Is like, man, you're a busy guy. Like, you're constantly doing stuff. Before we move, let me adjust this mic real quick.
All right.
Went like right in your face.
Awesome. How is that?
Let's see. Where's that?
Do you edit it all, or is this going to be a...
Oh, yeah.
Because I love the idea of this just being in
I mean,
there.
I will
No, we don't have to do
cut
that.
whatever we need to cut, and I'll leave it. There we go.
Right.
But yeah, like
I'm going to move the seat off of this. There we go.
Oh yeah,
So
we
bump
can get
and-
situated all we want
Bump
to.
and grind and such.
But yeah, you're a super busy dude. Now, you said you've been doing this for a while. Now you're from Oxford, right?
Corinth, Mississippi.
Corinth. Excuse me. Okay.
I did live in Oxford for 3.5 years
Okay.
when I was going to the university and working at the university after that. But
Gotcha. Now, when did you start playing music? Was this high school? Earlier than that?
like started playing just like recreationally,
Yeah, like
or started playing out.
I guess when did music for? Because I'm a big music education nerd, so I'm always like looking for everybody's origin story. So like, when was that first moment when, I guess the music struck you?
So I was always interested in it. I started playing guitar in like the 4th grade, and people think this is a joke, but I legitimately, like, I started wanting to play guitar when I saw School of Rock in the 4th grade.
That's why, dude, I love that
School
movie.
of Rock and the Antonio Banderas movie, specifically Once Upon a Time in Mexico, but where Antonio Banderas is the mariachi that carries the guns.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so I got like really into trying to play guitar in that style.
That's super cool, man.
But Yeah, it's always kind of been there. And my grandfather worked for Wurlitzer, and he died before I was born. But I grew up my whole life hearing that he had invented this drum machine and that he
For
played all this
real.
stuff by ear, and he did all the, having digitized reel-to-reel tapes of him, carrying his tape recorder up to the church that they went to and playing organ for hours and hours. And so there was always kind of this ever-present thing because my family loves music and they all listen to music a lot, but nobody in my immediate family is really a musician. I mean, my brother played guitar a little bit and
Yeah.
gave me a guitar, like gave me one of my first guitars, but it was more of a hobby. Like he just kind of played guitar here and there. It was never I don't think there was any aspiration other than just like playing guitar and having
Yeah.
fun with it. And so it was kind of ever present. But fourth grade I started playing, and I would play covers at friends' parties or church events or whatever. When I was 14 years old. But my first show playing mostly originals I was 15.
Cool.
So that was 2009.
Okay. Very cool. 2009. I'm trying to think of how old, much older. How old are you now?
26.
26.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah, it'll be 11. Oh my goodness, 11 years since my first show. Next in like a little over a week and a half.
Holy crap, man. That's cool. Now, any like formal music education, band, choir, anything like that?
No, I did do campus country at Northeast, which doing that and playing music in church and like a kind of a bigger, like more modern church.
Now, what is campus
Kind
country?
So it was in Northeast Mississippi Community College. They have it started as a country western kind of program, and it morphed over the years. I have several friends that were in it, and I got to know the guy that was over it, and I was in it for 2 years. It's like it was born as country western, but the more it went on, the singers would pick songs. So you'd have about a half country western, you'd have some Christian songs, and you'd have some pop songs and all that.
Gotcha.
And I played guitar and just anything that needed to be done. Like we didn't have a banjo, so I spent a long time like making a banjo patch on effects pedals and
that's-
like I had the old rubber bracelets that everybody would that
Yeah.
were really big,
Like
and,
Live
like,
Strong and stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I had one of those that somebody gave me, and I realized that if you palm mute with that and EQ something right and fix settings, you can make a pretty decent banjo.
Dude, you are a wizard, man.
Well, like it needed to be, there needed to be a banjo, or like there was a
Yeah.
song that was just going to be piano, and I didn't really want to sit it out because it was John Legend's All of Me. I was like, I want to play on this because nobody else was. It was like super minimal,
Right.
and the director was a bass player. Like he went to Belmont and all this stuff, and he had a couple stand-up bass bows just around the place, around his office. So I used one and spent some time and made up like a relatively convincing cello patch and played like a cello part for the song.
Dude, you're like the MacGyver of like getting cool sounds, man. That's so cool. It's very like John Cage like and stuff.
I'm a fan.
Dude, yes. Like, what can we do to this to make this kind of sound? Do you know who Christopher Dean is?
It sounds familiar, but I
He's,
can't say for sure.
He's one of the percussion professors at University of North Texas, and he's one of those guys. He just like sits in a room and makes weird sounds all day. Like we played one of his pieces in college, and like, do you know what a flexitone is? It's like this weird instrument, like it's made out of metal, and you like play it, and
Yes.
then it goes. Whoop, 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 whoop. We were playing this piece. It was called Pyroflegathon, and it's about like this mountain of fire and like in like Greek mythology or something like that, but it's like part of the underworld. I know that. And we had to bow flexitones with like a cello bow, and it was the creepiest sound I've ever heard in my life. But
I'm about that.
that's so cool, man. Like, I mean, even before we hit recording, you were constantly like, oh yeah, I got this sound out of this. Like, I guess, like, has it always been a necessity thing for you? Like, when you come up with these creative sounds, because like when you're talking about playing in that, it's always been like, we need a banjo, but like we don't have one, so I'm gonna come with that. So is necessity like always the mother of invention, or do you just sit down and come up with weird sounds sometimes?
I would definitely lean toward coming up with weird sounds sometimes, and that ends up ultimately kind of informing what I'm going to do in a more structured way. But like, I'm really interested in sound itself. It's like of course there's the whole songwriting thing, and I focus on that. But for me, that's always been secondary. Like I did an acoustic record, acoustic-ish record a few years back, and it still was just like loaded with all these little things and tapes and samples and whatever I could find to work into it. Or when I was first learning to write songs, I was also learning to record songs, and it was like for me, I never just wanted to do like me with a guitar and just singing. There were a lot of artists that were friends of mine or artists that I love that's all it is. But when I realized that you could do anything with just like free software, like when I realized that you
Right.
could turn an acoustic guitar into any sound you could imagine if you just like spend enough time with it,
Yeah.
it kind of like it opened everything up. Like I found some old recordings a while back of my dad had some old like Windows computer games, some like early online computer games like
Yeah.
flight simulators and stuff. And there was
Hmm.
a microphone that came with it, like a clip-on microphone. And I didn't have any mic that I could record stuff with, but I found that mic and I would clip it to the inside of an acoustic guitar. And there used to be a sound recorder that shipped with Windows, and it was honestly pretty bad. It was just a one track record, play, erase, whatever,
Yeah.
but it had effects, and the effects weren't at all, you couldn't do anything to fix them, but they had, an echo and a reverse, like two or three things.
Yeah.
And I would just do that. And of course, you can't edit any of it. You'd hit reverse, and unless you undo it, that's just there, and then you add an
Right.
echo on top of that and vice versa. And I found this CD that was all these recordings I made in like 7th or 8th grade of me just with an acoustic guitar like playing into Audacity, or first with Windows Sound Recorder and then
Right.
later with Audacity. And you can hear my nephews crying in the background, and it's all
Oh
reversed.
wow. How cool
So-
is that though, man? I think that's really cool too. And I think it helps break down a lot of walls because someone like you, like it seems like your journey in music and your journey in like engineering have been pretty parallel from what I'm gathering with that, in the sense that like you've been a songwriter and an engineer for the most part of your career as far as manipulating sounds and stuff goes.
I would say like absolutely. I mean, when I was younger and first started writing songs, I was into a lot of that like mid to late 2000s like tooth and nail stuff. And so like
Yeah.
even when I wrote songs, I didn't write I was only playing, acoustic guitar and singing, but I was
Mhm.
never writing in the context of that. In my
Right.
head, I was always writing as if I were, and even played, I was one of those like 15-year-olds that played my acoustic guitar way too hard, because
Yeah.
for me it was like I'm going to play this as if I'm playing it,
Right. Like,
loudly.
Yeah. Learn how to play Welcome Home by Coheed and Cambria.
Yeah. I don't know that I ever learned that one, if
I
I'm
never
being
did, dude.
honest.
That was like the staple, though. It's like in my high school, if you played guitar, you knew how to play Welcome Home and Aerials by System of a Down.
I don't know that one.
Oh man, that was like for the longest time, because I was not really a guitar player till like college, so I knew how to play Aerials and that was it. But heck yeah, man. But I think that's really cool because most people feel very intimidated when it comes to recording and engineering and stuff like that. And for someone like you that's just able to dive in and experiment and make it its own art form in and of itself, that's really refreshing, and it's really inspiring. And
Thank you.
and hopefully that can like take the edge off of some people who are intimidated by like starting like DIY recording and stuff like that. Because for me, like it was engineering has always been just a necessity. Being a drummer. When I first graduated college, like I didn't have a band, so I was like, well, if you don't have a band, you got to figure out how to do something.
Yeah.
So like you learn how to record so you can play along to other stuff, since you can't practice with the band.
There's there's a quote from Phil Elverum. I don't know if you've listened much to Mount Erie or the Microphones, but I'm a big fan of pretty much everything he's done. But I watched an interview with him forever ago where he talked about how he's never mic'd drums the same way twice, because he records everything by himself. And he said, because it's going to sound enough like a drum kit. Like, you're going to get the effect of there being drums there. And so, like, I don't worry too much with things like getting an exact mic placement every time, which I thought that was so interesting. Because, like, I'm a little more particular than that, but it's...
Right.
I feel like music is... Well, it exists in other art forms. Like, you have people that are very stringent about making very realistic visual art. But I feel like music is the only art form that completely faithful representation that's like the universal goal. It's like there's obviously, we put value in film that doesn't look like real life. We put value in any kind of visual art that doesn't look like real life. But when it comes to music, I feel like even, from the biggest mainstream acts down to people that are doing things on our level, there's this strange obsession we still haven't gotten over about presenting sound perfectly. And that's so strange.
Huh.
Like, it's the only type of creativity that I feel like we still have that rule of, no, if it's a drum kit, it has to be close mic'd and be this particular sound.
Yeah.
If it's a voice, it has to sound like they're whispering in your ear when you put on headphones. It's like,
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. You're. I totally. Yeah.
and on one hand, I get it. Like, I feel like people want that energy or that kind of magnetism that they would feel while there's a band right in front of them,
Right.
But it's definitely interesting to me that I feel like, for the most part, we haven't really crossed that threshold yet. There are a lot of artists that are pushing those boundaries, and that's kind of sneaking its way into pop music, which I think is really cool.
That's exactly what I was about to ask you. I was gonna say, like, do you feel like it's changing? Because we do, the Billie Eilish upset, if you will, like, like it, the DIY. We're moving into the age of DIY musicianship. Like an album that was recorded in a bedroom just like swept the Grammys.
Yeah, and that's awesome. And
I think
it doesn't sound like a big pop record. Like, it's the vocals are very, it's very whispery. The music is very sparse. It's like, and I'm actually, so I'm not just a super huge fan. Like, my fiance loves Billie Eilish, but when we listen to that record, it amazes me how much is there for there being like, there's never more than maybe 4 elements happening at one time, present in the song at one time, but it's still like everything's exactly where it needs to be.
Yeah, like the attention to detail. Like, personally, just because like her singing style is not my cup of tea, but I'm not saying it's, not saying it's bad. But like, because when she swept the Grammys, I went back and listened to that record because she's never really been on my radar, But like, yeah, the attention to detail and the production of it was something that was, you could tell that like it was a very personal endeavor. Like there are a lot of big budget records that you feel that have just been kind of cranked out. And like that's the feeling in a lot of like, I hate the word mainstream music because like, but this record you could definitely tell that was just like 2 people spent a lot of time on this before they presented it to the world. Like what's that song? Zanny, have you heard that song?
I think so.
It's like the 3rd track on that record, or something like that. But like, there's like some weird auto panning happening, like in the middle of the chorus, and it's like where did they come up with like the amount of just like strange engineering done? Was just incredible to me. So so do you feel like we're on the cusp of that like sound as an art form era, or?
I think that we have absorbed it, and we will absorb it like every other thing that was strange to pop music. Like, I was never really big into like the bro step stuff, but it's like after like Skrillex and all this gets big, we start hearing these wobble bass sounds and much more like dialed back ways show up in pop music. So I think anytime something that's strange that catches on gets big enough, people are going to start, I guess, co-opting that. But it's always going to be for good reason, it's always going to be the more accessible version. And I get that because, like, Billie Eilish and her, it was Phineas, her brother, the producer. Yeah. They're not making a record to be played in, tiny venues and art house. Like, there's obviously like there is a goal of common accessibility there. Right. And it's like, so I think that we're at a time that stuff is entering pop music more and entering pop culture more. But I think the version that blows up will always be the one that's easier for people to get into. Like, I remember with Kanye West and Yeezus, or like My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. It's like, there were a lot of things on there that I heard on like smaller name experimental hip hop artists, which did it maybe to a more extreme end, or maybe even made something I might have enjoyed more. But there's still something to be said about the fact that Kanye West brought it to the audience that he did. At the same time, obviously it's going to be changed in some way or dialed back in some way, because, the average listener who turns on the radio is not really going to be looking for some, they're not going to be listening to the first couple clipping records or something,
Oh, you listen
like
to clip
a little bit. I'm not like deeply entrenched, but
they are. It's really weird. They were one of my top artists on Spotify one year, and some of their stuff is so creepy, like because it's such just dark noise hip hop, man. But it's just like, it's one of those like it reminds me of like the first time I listened or watched Lady Gaga perform. It was one of those that was like this is like, you can't hate this. This is too good, you know?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
you know, regardless of how you feel about Lady Gaga, she is amazing at what she does.
Yeah,
And like,
she's a
yeah,
very good vocalist and an incredibly good performer.
right.
And I remember when she came out, seeing a couple of music authors, music writers and things talk about, there was always this comparison to like older, more shocky musicians. Like people talked about David Bowie a little bit, which I thought was strange.
Mm-hmm.
Not because I think it's a bad comparison, but I think that there's a lot to be said for somebody doing things like being more outward and more kind of ridiculous with their stage performance of things. That was a different thing in 1972 than it was in 2008 or 2009. It was
Right.
but it's like I agree, because she does kind of fill that same space of being very accessible and very poppy and obviously
Mm-hmm.
very talented, but also um weird for the people who are tuning in to top 40 radio, which that's
Yeah.
cool. Like anything that makes it more interesting is great. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't even want to, disparage, the most mainstream stuff. Like
Right.
like a lot of people when I was younger, I was, very militant against that kind of
Oh,
thing or
yeah.
whatever. But it's like even a band like Florida Georgia Line or like Nickelback that we hear
Yeah.
musicians joke about all the time. The music fits a very specific purpose.
Right.
Like I have friends who love Florida Georgia Line and they talk about, oh, it's just great music to ride with the windows down. It's like, well, that's the purpose it fills. Like
Right.
it's not trying to make anyone feel deeper or fulfilled, and it's not supposed to. It's just supposed to be fun.
Yeah.
You know?
And that's, that's I have like vehemently defended Justin Bieber in many of argument like similar to that. Like, pop music's supposed to be pop. It's not, it's not supposed to like make you feel things on like an intellectual or emotional, like super deep. I always compare it to like good food or good beer. Like,
Yeah.
I think like you should have a refined enough palate to know the good stuff from the bad and appreciate the good, or like the refined, excuse me. But like, I will never ever be above a double quarter pounder with cheese.
Exactly,
I'm never
yeah.
too proud to eat a McDonald's hamburger.
Yeah.
But it is what it is too. And I think I listened to an interview with Justin Vernon a while back. It was Justin Vernon and Aaron Rodgers, quarterback of the Green Bay Packers, like sat
Like,
down. They just sat across from each other.
Kind of a strange pairing.
It is. Well, like, Aaron Rodgers is a huge Bon Iver fan, but it was one of the coolest things. But Justin Vernon talks about, because he won a Grammy, and he was like, it was the weirdest thing in the world to him. Like, he did not enjoy himself. But he always talks about like, music to him is an emotional commodity. So like, all we're doing as musicians is just helping each other grow emotionally. And then when you start putting like objective and competitive parameters on something like that, you're always going to come up with some sort of hole in your argument.
Yes.
Like, who is better, this or this? There might be faster people. There might be like faster guitar players or this, but like, better or worse in something as wide ranging as music to me is not a valid argument. Like, just let it be art and have fun with it. And, the stuff that moves you, let it move you. And the stuff that doesn't, it doesn't. I don't think
Absolutely.
so. Very cool. Man. Fantastic discussion, man.
Thank you so much.
Man, I love your views on art. I'm definitely, I'm definitely going to snip some quotes out of there, put them on social media.
Thank you.
Very cool, man. So I want to dive in real quick to your writing process. We talked a little bit about it. Like, you started off like songwritery, but you've been working in audio for such a long time. So if you wouldn't mind, I'd kind of like to go back to like the evolution of your songwriting process. So we could even go in order from like your released works. Okay. So if you want to go back to the beginning, that's fine. Or we can just talk about how your process has evolved over the years, either one.
I would say there's almost always kind of there's an idea in place for what I want the finished product to be, often before there's like an inspiration to take there.
That's
So
cool,
like, like my first EP, it was a lot of me hearing a song or a certain style and being like, I want to make something like that, and starting with that as my template, and which I know a lot of people, it's just how they work.
You got a ladybug on you, sorry, man. They've been raiding my house.
Go away from me.
Sorry about that.
Oh, it's all good. It's all good. But okay? The writing process for me has always been. I don't really have a set method for it. There's a song on the mostly acoustic record I did that started with me with a loop of 2 chords on one of my old samplers that I just like played on my guitar, put it at like a super low bit rate, and listened to it over and over. And then eventually I was like, well, maybe I'll add some more to this and turn it into something. Or like, there's a song I'm working on this current record that I was like, I want to make something that's like very dub techno or like very kind of like out there, like, almost house-ish. And so I started with a kick drum, and then I recorded my voice into all these different effects and like cut it up and started working with these chords. And then now where the song is a completely different place because I tried to sing over it and I found that I liked a different rhythm than I had. And so like now I'm trying to kind of find where those 2 ideas are going to intersect and how that's going to work.
Oh, wow.
So it's really hard to say if there's ever been a definite process, but I do work a lot of the time with a very specific idea of what's going to come out, and then it often comes out like very different. But I've often got an idea of like, I've always when working on records, I've always had like a theme for a record or an idea that I start with. And most of the time that's ended up getting abandoned or it's ended up getting put other places or kind of, turned into something else. But this one I'm working on right now is actually the first one I've ever had that I've followed a theme through for multiple months without abandoning it. So,
I mean, if you want to, could you go ahead and jump in on like what it's about and stuff?
So it's about the medical, well, not the medical field, but medical experiences and hospital related experiences. Because it's something that interests me. There are a lot of great records already going over, disease or, single things, about medicine. But my parents were both, my dad is an RN. My mom was a respiratory therapist before she retired. And I would go with them. If I was out of school one day, I would go hang out in the employee lounge at the sleep disorder center my mom worked at. And so I have all these very specific memories of growing up, going to hospitals and it not being a necessarily negative thing. Just like, I'm going to the hospital today. Right. My first real job of any kind is I would, like every 6 months, I would get paid $75 to help out with ATLS, which is where doctors will test for their, I think it's every few years they have to recertify if they're working in trauma. I don't know all the details, but they have to do a written test and then they have to come and explain on a dummy what they would do in a certain scenario they're given. And I got to be the dummy. They would make me up with like wounds and stuff and I would just lay on the table. My fiance was diagnosed with and subsequently beat cancer last year. So that, cool. that was, I was awesome. In and out with them and the clinics and hospital and all that. And so it's like, there are all these medical experiences. There are books that I've read or certain themes that have really, caught my attention. And, I don't know. I tend to like things that are, I don't necessarily want to say darker, but I do like, a lot of my favorite records are the records that are about things like mortality or things like, trying to make some, like as a kid, I got the bands that clicked for me were like the Flaming Lips and Me Without You were like 2 big bands. And both of them kind of address things like that in very different ways, but it's like those ideas where, the idea that you could tackle concepts like that in music was just awesome. I was like, why would you not write every song? Jack Alberson made a joke last night. I quoted this on Facebook, but he said, it's not a Ben Ricketts song unless someone dies at the end. We were just sitting around like before the show, know.
Well, dude, that's awesome that you beat cancer, man. Very cool.
Thank you.
I said awesome like right at the end of that. I was like, I hope you knows I meant awesome like that you beat it.
No,
but that's cool that you. So you're. I think it's safe to say like you're kind of like an album guy. Like when you think in terms of like works that you're gonna release, for what I'm gathering anyway, like it's way more like when I release works, it's like along the lines of like albums and longer works or multiple or like a collection of works more than just like singles and things like that.
I would say so. I mean, I do singles here and there. But most of my releases are EPs, and the reason for that being is I was going to work on a longer form project, and it didn't really come together. But I ended up getting in a groove where, those first few, I'd say all the way up until Where Nobody Knows, almost everything was like Bumps in the Night. Like it was a Halloween EP, was recorded in like 5 days, and it was like most of the songs were written in that time. Like there were some ideas, but I would get into a groove, and I would just go into my room and work and work and work and
Right.
work. And I don't know. I know that it is a very like single oriented type. Like I've got friends that do really well by putting up like one song on SoundCloud, and it's just like gotten everywhere. And it's just I wish that I enjoy doing singles, but for me a single is like I don't know, it's separate. It's like I'm just gonna either it's something that didn't turn into an album like I planned for it to, or it's something that I have otherwise abandoned, but there was one song that I was just super proud of. Like
yeah.
I don't think I've ever set out and been like, you know what, I'm gonna record a single.
Yeah.
That's never been
One
my
and
plan.
done.
Yeah.
I gotcha. Very cool, man. No, and I do appreciate longer works like that. I think it's really interesting that you get in a groove and you crank these EPs out, and that's a really that's a really good example of productive flow and finding what works for you too. You said you wrote it in like 5 days and stuff like that.
That was back in 2014. I wrote and recorded. There were a few ideas floating around for that one. That was when I was starting to kind of edge toward writing things longer. But there for a while, it was like for a long time when I was like in late teenage years and like very early 20s, I wrote really quickly and just like put things out. And I don't know. I got out of that, and now I focus more on really intensely focusing on projects or whatever. But I have friends who have done the whole trying to be as professional and as like as like tailored with it as possible, and they've done it to varying degrees of success. And I've got friends that have done the whole where we're just going to release singles all the time, and they've done it to varying degrees of success. So like, it's the best time. I really do think this is the best time for music, and the best time specifically to just do whatever you want to do. Because there's no guarantee as to what audience there's going to be or how long they're going to listen to it. And if there's not a guarantee, then like I don't understand. I don't know. I know that there are a lot of people that want it to be like, that they want to hit the proverbial big time. They want to make all the money. But for me, it's like, if that didn't work, like if that's where I put my energy, was like making a record that was going to sell X amount of copies and it didn't work, then I'd be like, I just put all of my effort into this very specific goal instead of just putting out what I want to put
Exactly.
out,
Yeah. And I've been in that mode before too, is like, cause social media and stuff like that, I felt like I was, like constantly trend chasing, like what's the next big social media strategy? Should I release cover videos? Should I do this, that, and the other? And that's kind of how this podcast came back around, is because I was, for every set way you think that works, there's an example of somebody who has done the complete opposite and had been very successful doing it nowadays. So it's definitely my philosophy now to just kind of like do the most fun thing first and then move from there. Yeah. And then like this podcast, like the idea of this podcast is that there's no one career choice in music anymore. Everybody just kind of does everything. And, if you're making the best art possible and you still have a day job, hey, you're still making the most honest version of your art. Like, who's to say you're not an actual, like nobody can say you're not a musician for doing that, I think it's very dangerous to put any kind of expression or any kind of art into purely like financial or like success terms. Because again, that's like, it feels so new, and it's like, I'm not going to be, I'm not trying to be the bohemian, I don't want fame or money but it's like, just plain and simple. I do think that being the sole metric that a lot of people measure the worth of what they make by, I think that's damaging. Like, I don't think it's not productive to making good things, and honestly, it's not healthy. Like, it's not good if somebody makes something, and that's a goal, that's one thing, but if somebody makes something with that as that's the sole end game for them, is to make something that X amount of people enjoy, and it's like, that just seems like it's set up to fail. Right. Right. I was talking to my brother this morning, and because there was one night I was I was playing a show and there were other bands there, and it just hit me. And it's nothing against like whatever band I was playing with, some out of town band or something like that. But I got the idea that we were all used car salesmen, because it was like, here's our mediocre songs, but we are going to like sell the crap out of them,
Yeah,
and
that's what you got to do, honestly.
right. Yeah, but like, like I said, or like you said, if you're making songs that simply cater to the masses, all you're really doing is just trying to like sell your used car as best as possible. I would much rather make and present things to the world that I enjoy, or I can at least sleep easy knowing at night, knowing, instead of being like, oh yeah, I'm not a huge fan of this song, but I hope it sells,
Well, there was a thing I read forever ago. There's a book, and I think it's like The Complete Singer-Songwriter. I just bought it for cheap on Amazon when I was like a preteen, and I still go back to it because there's stuff in it that interests me, and there's some of it that I'm kind of like, oh, this is written for a very specific type of singer-songwriter or whatever. But there's one quote in it. I think it's from a songwriter named Kelly Joel Phelps. I can't remember the name, but I think that was it. But he's got a quote about, and I think it was him that said it, that you can, a good song, you should be able to shake the piece of paper and a bunch of things come falling out of the song. Like a bunch of specific things fall off the piece of paper. And I love that because I've got a lot of friends who are great musicians and great songwriters who I've heard, like I've got one friend who I literally heard say, like, I'm trying to write music that more people can relate to. And I was like, I feel like if that's the goal, it's just going to end up alienating more people. Because if you're trying specifically to relate to everyone, then it's going to end up being so general that nobody has anything to like. Yeah. Nothing falls off the paper. Like nobody has anything to latch onto and say, well, that's what this is about to me,
Right, yeah. I think that's, I don't know how much you listen to Jason Isbell, but I think that's like why his music hits home for so many people, because it's like just specific enough to where you get like the real idea, like have you heard the song "Cover Me Up"?
I haven't.
Okay, but I mean, like they're like the lyrics of the song is just like it, it's like a love song, and it's so like I said, it's just specific enough to where you like really get the idea, and it just kind of like breaks your heart a little bit. So
that's one of the things I've always loved. I mean, I feel like this is a songwriter everyone loves, but I love like Leonard Cohen so much because Leonard Cohen had this tendency to really throw any pretense to the wind about people understanding what the details were. Like you felt like he was talking about a very specific person in a very specific place and subject in his life. And you could walk away knowing what the song was about, but you're never going to know who this person was who did this thing in this room wearing so and so. Famously, Raincoat is a perfect example. There are all the different, Jane came by with a lock of her hair. She said that you gave it to her. Like these very specific images, like these incredibly specific lyrics that have no, like literal zero general meaning. But it's like people are going to hear it, and however they hear it and wherever they are and however they interpret the lyrics, all those things are going to be very personal to them, how they understand that. Whereas I feel like songs that are specifically made to be relatable and, with whatever sense that may be, end up falling short because, again, like, it's, if I sit there and tell you I'm sad, everybody understands, okay, he's sad. Now, if I tell you the story of what is making me sad, even if you don't necessarily experience that, you can enter that mindset and you can empathize with that.
Yeah, definitely.
And I feel like that's where the big difference comes in. Like, people need to be able to, I don't know, we don't know people in situations based on these general descriptions. We know them based on these very concrete, sensory experiences we have with the world around us. And I think songwriting should be the same way. Like, people should have specific experiences of what happens in the song and the lyrics and have to interpret that instead of being handed, this is a sad song,
Yeah, it almost makes me, let me know if this is a good summation. It almost makes me wonder if great songs, based on what we're talking about, should be based on empathy or sympathy instead of empathy. Like, I don't know exactly what you're talking about, but I can kind of enter that mindset. Like, I haven't experienced that before, but I can definitely draw some sort of connection to you, even though I don't know exactly what you're going through. So that's sympathy, right? I always get empathy.
I get confused as well.
I think sympathy, empathy is like you've gone through it too. Sympathy is you haven't. So it makes me wonder if sympathy is what makes a great song, as opposed to instead of aiming for empathy, we should aim for sympathy.
Maybe so. It's like, I mean, they're for me. I've always gotten inspired by like things I see or things that I like, and, like directly experience. And this new record is so tied in with all that. Like we were in Chicago back in September. My fiance and I were, and we noticed that all of the buildings like faded out into the fog.
Oh, wow.
Not a single medical experience involved, but there's a song directed to kind of a fictional subject that's like stuck in a hospital room, and the whole idea is being stuck on a floor above the fog, where it's like it looks so cool from down below, but up there it's just like there's no view. Like you're just looking out a window into just white and gray, and that's it.
Oh, wow.
And because like that image itself, like looking up and seeing the buildings disappear was so cool. And then I think Hannah actually made the comment about like, yeah, but it's gonna suck working in one of those offices. And I was like, this is the perfect perfect image for someone who's just like completely detached with what's going on outside of them.
Wow, yeah, that's really interesting. That's cool, man. Oh man, I was gonna ask you something really important. Oh, congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. 10 more days.
Dude, very cool.
I'm very excited.
Dude, I'm happy for you, man. How long have y'all been together?
So this is where it gets weird. We've been together just over a year, but we've known each other for a long time. We kind of briefly dated, and then we kind of, when you're in early college and you talk to people.
Oh, yeah.
We talked. We had met at shows around Cleveland, and we had a lot of the same friends and things. And Hannah moved out to LA, and then we kind of reconnected. We reconnected over a Snapchat about Scrubs, the show Scrubs.
Yes, that's my favorite
yes,
show,
it's
man.
a great show.
Are we best friends now?
Yes, but we reconnected over a Snapchat about Scrubs, and they were like, "I'm moving back home," and we just hung out, and I don't know, like we always kind of kept like marginally in touch, like kind of in touch, and.
Yeah,
it just happened.
Dude, that's awesome, man. And I know this is a music podcast, but we're going to talk about marriage too, because me and Lana have been married a year and a half. Yeah, about a year and a half. But we've been together for like 5. But it was one of those like first date. We're like, oh yeah, this is a done deal. Like, yeah, we're done here.
It was within about a month that we started entertaining the notion of getting married and doing the whole life thing. It's pretty cool,
Heck yeah, man. Well, congrats again, man.
Thank you.
Sad for you.
I'm a lot more positive in outlook about the marriage, about this particular part of music. But it's like at the lowest point of me making music, like the biggest times that I've had trouble being like, is this worth it? I've had this thought of, even if I ever get to a point that I'm bored or this feels weird, like this is just what I do. It's like this is never going to be a thing that I don't do. And it's like inherently part of me. And it's the same way I feel like, granted, much more positively with my fiance and like most of my dear friends and my family, where it's like no matter what happens, I don't see a version of the world that this isn't just part of my life. Like in the best way. It's like at the hardest times, the most and I know it's weird to connect music with all of that necessarily, but music has been the one present thing for like years and years and years. And it's like, it ends up being a model for everything where it's like, yeah, at the worst times of me playing music, I've still been like, but this is just a part of my life. Like I could never remove this because it makes me happy. And even at the worst, it's still like the best possible thing I could think to be doing right now.
Yeah. Has there ever been a time where you thought about just hanging it up?
Never hanging it up, no. I've had those late night, kind of depressive drives home after bad shows where I'm like, is this worth it? Do I need to rethink how I do this? Or do I need to pull back on how I do this? But I've never had a moment that I'm like, I'm just going to stop. Because even when I was a little kid, I had images, like I always wanted to be an actor or a singer or something. I didn't know what, but I wanted to do something that was like presented. Yeah. And it's like, even if that means playing local shows when I'm 60, and that's fine. Like, it's like, I can't control anything, but I literally can't control anything but the music I'm putting out. And I may find new strategies to do that. And I may eventually decide to shop a record around or put something in somebody else's hands or whatever. But at the end of the day, I can't stop making, like, it's always there. Like,
I think that's an amazing outlook too. Cause I feel, in the past, I felt so much social pressure writing on music that really was all in my head. I felt like socially obligated to do these things because of, how, like who I was as a person or what kind of music I wanted to present to the world. And just knowing it's like this is something I do, like whether or not it, makes the big time or whatever is less relevant than this just being like a part of my character. you know.
So I read a book a few years back, Nick Offerman.
Yeah.
So he's got a couple books. Hey, do you have? I was about to ask if you had a Nick.
No, so I was checking our time. We're good. I was
So-
just curious how we were rolling.
One of his books is called Gumption,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like his 21 people he thinks like changed America or like made America, and a lot of them, because he's a woodworker,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of them are woodworkers. There's all kinds of celebrities and politicians and things, but he does a lot of woodworkers.
That's cool.
And something that really fascinated me was him talking about just the ongoing thing being, no matter what someone's passion and lot in life was, like a very workmanlike focus on things like woodwork. Like he talks about Japanese joinery, where it's only done with the wood itself. Like traditional Japanese joinery, it's not like there aren't nails and screws. It's like the wood is cut and crafted to fit together how it is.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It got me thinking a lot about things like woodwork and things like makers markets and things like friends of mine who weren't professional visual artists but presented and sold a lot of artwork like on their own terms. And I was just like, you can make music that way. Like
Yeah.
it's like you can make. Yeah, there's a kind of a joke line that has become my tagline on a lot of social media that most of my accounts says rock and roll is a maker's market.
Yeah.
And like I
saw
stand
that on
by
your
it.
Facebook, yeah. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And kind of going back to a conversation with my friend Dan, who is going to be the interview before you. He's a full-time accountant, but he was also a writer and composer for marching percussion, like marching band and drumline and stuff like that. And starting his own company, he eventually started his own design company where they like consult and design for marching bands around the country and stuff like that. And we talked about at what point, a hobby becomes a career and stuff like that. In his case, like it was something he did, and then it ended up like he didn't make the conscious decision to be like, all right, this is going to be my business now. I'm going to sell 1 million shows and blah, blah, blah. He was, it took on its own life before he turned it into a business. I think that's a good way to look at music. Like focus on making great art first, and then let the other stuff start to kind of build itself,
I do tend to have issues with the way that I've maybe worked before, that I feel like I haven't really lived up to that. Like for a long time, I would have friends that would see me making flyers or, would see me somewhere while I was on my laptop booking shows and say like, oh, you're the hardest working person I know. And like, I had this weird, it became something that I kind of identified with. Like where it was a big part of my identity being the guy who works all the time to make music and puts out all this. And I kind of fell out a couple years ago and I quit. I took a break for a few months, like a couple of months just to like stop. Like I still wanted to make music, but I was like, I got to slow down on this, because I realized that in a lot of cases I was playing shows that I wasn't necessarily like, I was on the way there, not really wanting to it's like even the shows that were great, it was very much like a duty to deliver, you know? And it's like, there's not this massive fan base that's demanding that. Like I'm literally demanding myself to, I'm demanding so much of myself to just keep running and keep being busy so I can feel like the guy who's, the busy musician who keeps going on for the art or whatever. And I'm like, there's no use in just identifying that way when I don't feel like making, playing the song. Like when I don't have any new music, so I'm playing 3-year-old songs and cosplaying as myself from years before,
Yeah, like when it becomes a chore,
And I don't want to be negative and say that, because most of those shows I still loved. Like, don't get me wrong, they were still great, but I did have to take some time to do some soul searching and be like, is this something that, am I identifying with being a musician more than I am focusing on just making music?
I had to do that same thing. Like one of the last live shows I played, I had a blast and everything, but I mean, how it is, like when you're working full time, you're married, this, that, and the other, like, and you go play a show that, has been either like booked last minute, or it's not necessarily at like the best venue or the best crowd or something like that. Like you have a blast, but on the driver's show, you're like, man, I gotta do this tonight,
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to sound ungrateful or anything like that, but it is one of those things like you wanna focus on being the best version of yourself,
And the truth is, like, there are gonna be nights that's inevitable, that it's gonna be a rough time. I mean, it's like a lot of the time. And I go into it and I know that it's going to be positive by the time I start playing and setting up and all that. But there are plenty of times when maybe I've had a long week or something, and that day, like early that day, I'm excited to get there and play the show. But the concept of packing up and driving and sitting in a bar for, X amount of hours and sound checking out, like, it's just like, do I really, like, why am I?
Like,
Now,
could
when
be in bed
when
right
it gets
now.
hooked up and everything starts, it's like,
Yeah.
no matter what the crowd is, no matter how the night's been, it's like, then it's time. It's like, no matter who's there, I want to deliver. But I mean, there are times that it does feel, it does get kind of like a chore, and I don't really think that's avoidable.
Yeah.
But I think that it's all about how you deal with it, and how, where for me it became like, oh well, I am never at these family events this year because I'm a musician. This
Yeah.
is what I do, which is like the kind of the bad side of that.
Right.
Where that becomes so much of an identity that you start neglecting things you probably shouldn't neglect.
Yeah, to fit that persona of like being the hardest working guy ever. And
Yeah.
I got you for sure, man. Oh my gosh, I was gonna say something, but I forgot what it was. Have you ever experienced like any sort of like burnout or anything like that, or would that be your biggest example of burnout?
That would be my biggest example, or things like I don't know. I only do a couple of full band shows, like here and there, like every year or so, and I'd say 90% of the people I've ever had like backing me up, we've been in the same mindset. We're great. The people that I do work with now when I do stuff like that are great. But like in the past, if I've had a bad experience, I'm not very assertive. Like I'm not like a tyrant band leader. So it's like whenever and this is the same way when I'm working alone. If things aren't working out the way I want, like sound wise, or if something's just not clicking, instead of getting upset, if I'm tired enough, it literally just, it kills my energy. And I'm just like, I need to come, I don't want to do this right now.
Yeah.
And like, even like with bands that I love that I've played, with backing me or whatever, there gets to be a point in the night that I get super tired and maybe a part's not coming out right. And I don't want to give up on it altogether, but I'm like, and it's not even like, oh, I'm just hanging up for that. It's like at that moment, I'm just like, I do not want to do what I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
But I know it's going to end quickly. Like I know, even after my worst shows, if I'm driving home, I'm just like, I'm going to wake up tomorrow and be thinking about whatever I want to record next, or whatever show I'm playing next, or however I'm going to present it next time. Like, I don't know. I feel like I've been doing it and going through that cycle of kind of self-doubt for so long that I just know it's a facade, and I'm just like, okay, I'm gonna get over this in a couple hours and be ready to get back out again.
That's great to like know your own behavioral patterns and stuff like that. I noticed that when I was training for the marathon. I did a marathon in December, and like it's the same thing with running. Like you hit a point in running where you're like, this sucks, I'm gonna die, why did I do this? And then after a while it's the same thing. Like, at mile 7 you're gonna be like, dude, screw this, I want to go home. And then when you get there, like, oh yeah, we're in familiar territory, it's cool, I know how, I know this is gonna pass. Very cool, man. While we're on the subject of, you talked about playing with the backing band, I do want to get a little snippet about like how your live setup works. So we can get in the weeds on some gear if you want to.
Okay.
If you're not a gear nerd, it's okay. Well, you can fast forward a little bit. But,
So it's had different eras and things. When all of this first started, like I was playing acoustic shows, and it was probably 2 years into it that I started using electronics. And electronics consisted of things I made on my laptop. It bounced to an MP3 player, and I would like play guitar and sing over it, and that was it.
I got you.
And then it kind of evolved from that, where I would maybe play guitar and keys and still have like an MP3 player. And then it got to where I would use a laptop on stage, and most of the time still doing tracks or having just like basic things already laid out, and mostly playing guitar and singing, or sometimes I'd add another musician on top of it. And I mean, people liked it. It was fun. Like those were the first shows I played with it, and people, I think that, I think when it comes to electronics, there's a lot to be said for people that do really improv heavy, really live based things. But I also think that there's kind of this almost elitist thing that comes with like being all live with things, that I hear from some people that I think the effect on the audience is often overstated.
Really?
I feel like if people are feeling something, they're going to, it's like, I know a lot of people who are more traditional musicians who hate the way that so many big bands are using tracks right now. But it's like, we went to see, I never really listened to Bring Me the Horizon much, but before we saw them a year ago, my fiance loves them. And Honestly, it was like, there was a lot of stuff on track and sample, and it was a lot of like big stuff. It's like when you're in a crowd like that, like I saw Kid Cudi years ago. Same thing. There wasn't even a DJ on stage, it was just him. Like a DJ somewhere off stage. I don't think it really has that big of an end effect on who's actually enjoying it. If people are feeling it, they're feeling it. If it's a good performance, it's a good performance. If somebody's essentially doing karaoke or if they're playing with a 15-piece band, like the spirit's there. But so it went through some different phases of using a laptop and using different equipment and using different things. And for Here Asleep, I had done a tour with a friend of mine who does mostly acoustic sets, and I've been kind of listening to more acoustic and more minimal stuff. So those shows, it was like an acoustic guitar and like an old Roland 202 sampler and like some effects pedals and stuff, and that was it. And I would like sit in the tape players, and I would sit on the floor and like do a lot. It was very improv heavy.
Cool.
Like there were songs that it was based around, but I really let things stretch out and let rhythms kind of sneak in, and it was very like on the fly.
Cool.
And now it's kind of come back around to kind of I try to mix the having things that are set in stone, that are on track, that are sampled or whatever. The things that need to be there and the basic at bare minimum song is there. And it's like, and that can free me up to, I can play different synth lines. A lot of time when I was playing guitar live, I would write different lines that I would play live because I'm like, this is the only time somebody's going to hear this with this guitar sound, so it might as well have its, have something different. Or like a lot of time when I'm playing synth live, I'll harmonize with my vocal lines, or I'll like harmonize with bass lines or whatever on the synth because I know the actual line is there. It's on the sampler. It's good to go. So I could either present that plainly and be like, I'm just singing over it, or I could like find a way to kind of mix those two worlds. So right now I've got a lot of the basic stuff is on a sampler, just a Roland SP404SX. I've got a 4-track tape machine that is loaded with one of the tracks is stuff I prepared on the computer, but the other 3, I literally sat there with an iPad and pulled up videos or like various, just various sound things on the internet and ran them through effects and played with them and just tried to get weird textures.
Okay.
And I never know where it is on the tape. Like I never check the counter. I just rewind it at the beginning of the show. For transitions or for certain parts of songs, I can fade stuff in. Like I've got one track that's tonal sounds. And it's like either during noisier parts or transitions, I'll fade it in. But sometimes, like last night at a show, I faded it in. And it's always either going to be really cacophonous or it's going to work. And when by chance it works, it's the most beautiful thing. That it's like, oh my gosh! Like I'm sure people in the in the crowd don't notice it, but it's like to me when I hear this tonal thing I prepared months ago and never paid attention to again, and I faded in at just the right time, and it's part of the song. It's like wow, like this will never happen again.
Yeah, I saw the tape deck when I saw you after the last Waltz show, and I was like, what is happening right now? So
there's one track that's voices that have been messed with, so it's like all these interviews and things and vlogs. I was just scrolling through YouTube with things like that. There's one track that's prepared stuff on the computer that I made and like with a variety of synths and plugins and all that. That's just mostly noise and kind of weird experiments. One of them is like natural tonal sounds. So I was running people playing classical guitar or whatever through a bunch of effects and just trying to get non-musical sounds out of it. And then one track, half of it is synths and half of it is drum sounds that have been altered to not really be rhythmic or be drummy anymore, but things that are stretched out or like, messed with. And
gotcha.
But that kind of brings an element of randomness. I run vocals through, I used to do just kind of, I would make general vocal patches with like a cheap effects processor that I still use. I've got a $100 guitar effects processor that I got as a gift as a preteen. I still use it for almost everything in recording. Like I love it. It's a Zoom G1X. It's not a very good pedal to get.
I think I've heard of that
like
one,
if,
actually.
If you plug in a guitar and you're trying to get classic guitar sounds, it's not a great pedal. But like it's got some of the most just wacky, ridiculous kinds of like modulation effects and things on it. And I love it. And like the reverbs are strangely good. And it's got, so like I use that for everything, but I would make vocal patches for that live for a while, but now it's like my vocal chain is just through a delay pedal and then into the mixer. Cause I submix everything on stage. So like I'll use tap tempo and get rhythm, but I can also do like, big block harmonies by messing with the feedback. And I can, do all kinds of weird vocal effects just with a delay pedal, and that's it.
Yeah.
And so I'm sorry if that's a long-winded answer, but I've got generally I've got the sampler, I've got the tape deck, I've got vocal effects, and then up on top of the mixer I have just a mono synth, like a Korg monologue that most of the songs have a patch for them, and sometimes I'll work in like different parameters that I can mess with for that song. They'll have a specific, that's saved into the patch or whatever. Um, and then I also, one of my first kinds of, music toys and kind of tools that I had was my sister-in-law got me the first K oscillator for Christmas years ago. I was like, 17 years old, just the little chord K oscillator. And it's got these really goofy, like it's got a feedback loop setting on it that I love. It's got this one really high pitched like filter sweep sound that I use constantly live. Like I only use a few patches, but it's another one that like, it's not really so random, but it's something that I can have there and kind of like, I know what patch is what, and I can just reach up and mess with it. And, I know kind of how it's mapped out, but it's still a little imprecise. So it's just a fun little, I don't use it a lot. Like it's not a major part of the live set, but it's like, there are a couple sounds that I'm like, okay, I know that I want that little sound right there. And I'll always have it just, at arm's reach, ready to, to do whatever with.
That is so cool, man. I would love if if it's possible to, you could just shoot me like a cell phone video of your live rig, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah,
we can
absolutely.
totally like put it in the video or put it on Patreon, because we got a Patreon.
I did not know that.
Oh
That's
yeah,
awesome.
I'm trying to plug the Patreon thing. So
you should get the Working Musicians podcast. Was it the official title?
it's the Modern Working Musician.
The Modern Working Musician Premium Snapchat.
That's okay, cool. We'll do that, man. I'll put a video of your live setup on Patreon, so you gotta pay $5 to see Ben Ricketts' live setup or go to his show.
Yeah, that one too.
Yeah.
I like that recommendation also.
Either or, pay me $5 or pay Ben Ricketts $5.
Pay me a fraction of $5 with 4 other bands.
Real quick, man. You're booking a tour right now, right? Or you're
Yes. I haven't toured in a couple of years, but
Cool.
I'm ready to do it again.
Would you walk me through your tour booking process real quick?
So it's changed over a few years. I used to reach out a lot more to bars and things or whatever that I knew I could get a guarantee. Since I've played more and kind of got more in the hook of touring, I like doing DIY shows and house shows for the most part. But I used to reach out to venues first. I have been doing that some on this tour. But a lot of the time, I'll either start with looking up music venues or I'll start with finding bands. Like going to Bandcamp and typing in a city and searching that tag and just going through pages and pages and pages. Finding 5 or 6 that I like, making a list of what order I want to contact in, and I'll contact 2 of them. And if one of them drops, then I'll move on. It's like,
wow.
And I like to get a full bill together when I can and then email a venue, whatever venue the band recommends. Okay, I got a bill that's Ben Ricketts from Memphis, Tennessee, this local band, this date, all the details are ready, and send that on.
Yeah.
Or in some cases, it'll be, a house show or whatever, where those kinds of shows, they generally find low, a lot of smaller DIY things, like they're just happy to have touring bands, and they'll find locals that'll fit, and will make sense. But like everything about, the way that I make music and the way it's very, there's no one size fits all answer. It's a lot of just making it work.
That's super cool though. I've never, you're the first person I've ever run into that goes through Bandcamp and contacts bands and stuff. That's really cool.
Well, thank you. It's that I hate Reverb Nation, but that was the one good thing about Reverb Nation was how easy it was to search bands by geographical.
Oh yeah.
It's not so easy on Bandcamp, but you can kind of do it.
Now your music's on Bandcamp too?
Yes,
Okay.
Everything but Pandora for some reason.
What are your thoughts on like Bandcamp versus Spotify, iTunes, and streaming, all that stuff?
I think they fill different purposes. I like Bandcamp as I heard someone refer to it as a digital record store one time, which I like that. Like you can go, like if I want to find new music, I can go to Bandcamp Discover and I can type in any tag and find anything I could possibly imagine. And there's so many records I've found by people that, may have 5 purchases on Bandcamp or may not have. Like so many records that I really love that I've just stumbled on. That's just somebody made it in their house and put it up. Whereas I like Bandcamp streaming when you can. I feel like Bandcamp isn't great on mobile. Of course, if you buy an album, you get it on the app and you can stream it, and that's a really good interface. I like it, but I'm not a big fan of Bandcamp as a streaming tool for stuff that people haven't bought. And I think that we could, for very good reason, go on all day about the problems with Spotify.
Yeah.
But it is where people are listening, and it is the easiest platform to listen on, in my opinion. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't like golden age mentality with any kind of art or with any kind of music, and I
You mean-
understand why people have a thing about Spotify right now, because a lot of people are losing money because of it. But I feel like we have this idea of what the golden age of music was, or the music industry, but the music industry, like recorded music, is like, what, maybe 100 years old?
Yeah.
Like pop music 100 years ago was a guy going around selling sheet music.
Yeah.
And like that, some guy in Tin Pan Alley had composed. And it's
Right.
like that. So the idea that people could be like, oh, things aren't what they used to be, everything's on stream. This could be the norm. Like, who knows? It's not been, the music industry has not been around long enough, and there hasn't been an established set of norms for the way people take in music that's ever lasted more than a few years. It's like, even in the age of vinyl records, that, when that was there was never a standard pressing weight and standard way that everybody, mastered something. There was the advent of 8-track and of cassettes and, all these different things. And I don't think that the music industry is old enough or has had a consistent enough block of time where people took in music in a specific way.
Yeah.
So
Wow, yeah.
I've got a lot of issues with Spotify's payouts, for instance, as but that's everybody, everybody's covered it by this point. Like, it's a known fact. Spotify is like basically every other current, big tech app company, and that it's not great.
Yeah, yeah.
But like, it is where people are listening right now. It's how people are taking in music, and we can either reject that and say, well, I'm going to take this stand, and my music's not going to be on there, or we can just accept that, hey, this is not the best platform for artists, but it's where people are, and I'm going to meet listeners where they are. And I don't want to disparage anybody who doesn't feel that way. If somebody there are a lot of musicians that I love personally and also as fans who despise Spotify or don't have anything on it, and that's perfectly valid.
Right.
But it's like, for me, it's like, would I rather have this integrity thing, that I don't really feel is an integrity thing, in my opinion, where I'm like, oh, I'm not going to have my music there? Or would I rather be able to be like, oh yeah, this one app that everybody in this room has, go check out music,
Right.
It's Phil Spector, not going to talk about Phil Spector, the dude, but the producer, worked toward, making music that sounded good on transistor radios. Mm-hmm. Nobody would have ever thought transistor radios sound good or that they were the best way to enjoy music, but they were how people were enjoying music. Mm. And so we have this whole era of pop music and of very good, very solid pop music that was created to meet people where they were. It was mono made and mixed to sound good on like a bad speaker.
Yeah, and if anything, Spotify serves as a fantastic business card, because it's like you said, it's like, you can find me, if somebody says you can find me on Spotify, like like most people, it's so much easier, to have people find you and stuff like that. So very cool. One last question. I'm going to take a rip off of Tim Ferriss. I don't know if you're listening to Tim Ferriss.
We watched Ferris Bueller's Day Off the other night, which was pretty tight, but no, not Tim Ferriss.
Tim Ferriss, he wrote a book called The 4 Hour Work Week. This podcast is like a rip off of his podcast. Anyway, because we are killing this interview, dude.
How long have we been going?
Not 2 hours. We've been about an hour.
Oh my goodness, I'm sorry.
No, don't apologize.
I have a tendency to
meander. This is
awesome. When we did the podcast, I did the stump thing with Russ that time.
Uh-huh.
Or with Ross, I think that we went on for like an hour and a half, like an hour and 45 minutes.
We're killing it,
dude.
I think you could totally have your own podcast, because you've blown my mind like at least a half a dozen times tonight. Like, you are a very insightful, very philosophical dude, and this has been an extreme pleasure. If you had to pick your favorite or most gifted book, what would you pick?
All right.
I could do top 3 too if we need to do top 3.
Let me think over just a second. My favorite work of fiction ever, like of all time, is Franny and Zoe by J.D. Salinger.
Okay.
I mean, of course, like Catcher's good. I get the hype or whatever, but I feel like the Glass Family stuff is it's just better in
Really?
every way. And I mean, there's some of it that meanders a lot. There's some of it that goes on, but Franny and Zoe is like this perfect. Like, I love it, and I don't want to spoil anything for anyone who reads it, but like the last page is like has the best fiction like conversation
Really?
that I've ever read. Like it's my favorite, and
Cool.
I'll talk about that when we're not.
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, will you text
but,
me that the name of that so I can put it in the show description too, so people
Yeah.
can look it up. 'Cause, yeah, I've never read it, so I need to check it out too.
It was a 2-part thing printed in like the New Yorker, and it's two of the most of his work is about the Glass family, and he got like really interested in Eastern religion, and a lot of critics just basically said the Glass family stories were his way of just like basically proselytizing about Eastern religion.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of really interesting things, and in that case, it's about two of the siblings named Fran. There's one short story that's Franny and one that's Zoe, and it is everything that J.D. Salinger gets accused of being, kind of pretentious and overly wordy and kind of meandering and all, but it's the best version of his writing, in my opinion. Like I'm not, making any blanket statements here,
Yeah,
but
gotcha.
I love that one. Of course, I read a lot of history constantly. I read a lot of religious history and a lot of religious texts. I grew up Christian, and I grew up very fundamentalist, very conservative Christian household. I still consider myself a Christian, but I've taken a lot of different religious texts from different things, and I love that. Like,
Yeah.
So there's a lot I do enjoy. Of course, both out of nostalgia and out of just like liking it, the Bible. But I love Franny and Zoe. Another one that was a really big one I read very recently. Hannah got me a stack of books for Christmas, and it's like a lot of stuff I love. It's like a bunch of weird history stuff. A lot of stuff that's just kind of boring. But there's one book in there that they picked up just on a whim called The Radium Girls. And
I think my wife was reading listening to a
I
podcast on it.
love this book. I shot through this book in like a few days, and there's a song about it on the new record.
Cool, man.
Like before I finished reading it, I was like, "This would be it. This fits perfectly." Like there are all these really terrible, really tragic medical experiences and stories in the book, and I was like, "Well, this is exactly what I needed to read at this exact moment." And like,
Cool.
so far, it's my favorite. It's one of my 2 favorites on the record, and it's like this very slow burning kind of like Josh Shaw came up to me after a show, though I played it for like the second time live when I played with them last, and he was like, that's like love making music. I'm like, thanks. It's about radium poisoning, but like I definitely get the vibe. But
That's beautiful.
so Franny and Zoe, the Radium Girls. I'm sorry, this is a hard question to answer.
No, you're good, man. And
And,
you can send me like Ben's top 10 book list if you want to, man.
I've never been super big into C.S. Lewis's straight up fiction, but growing up, I really loved his theology and his like semi-theology. Like I loved The Great Divorce, and I recently reread it again.
Yeah, I read it like once a year, man.
Yeah, it's so good. And I loved, of course, the Screw Tape Letters is like a really good entry level one. That's still, it's a staple. Clive Staple. Anyway, but I really think those would be like the 2 right now that come to mind.
Cool.
There is a song, the closing song on Where Nobody Knows is a bunch of references to J.D. Salinger, because I read his the biography that was compiled of him that they spent like years and years putting together, and kind of processing like, wow, you can really like someone's work and then also be appalled by them as a person in every way. And so like there's this one song, the closer on Where Nobody Knows, is called Jerome, and it's about that idea, but it's just peppered in with all these references to various J.D. Salinger characters, because it's a song about that idea of like, wow, like maybe the people that influence you in life are like secretly terrible, and you just have to, like, you have to figure out how you reconcile that, know?
Yeah, separate the art from the artist kind of thing.
Yeah, and I definitely think there are limits. But
Oh yeah, for sure, definitely. Well, cool, man. Before we wrap up, where can people find you on the internet?
The music is all on Bandcamp and Spotify and Apple Music. If iTunes is still around, it's there too.
Cool.
I got an email a while back. I'm on Napster, which is pretty tight.
Nice.
I'm on Tidal. I didn't know this till recently.
Somebody call Jay-Z. No.
Yeah. I'm not on Pandora, but my dad's the only Pandora listener that I still know, and he has access because he's my dad.
My mom listens to Pandora, but
well, your mom couldn't find me then.
I'm gonna tell her to quit Pandora because Ben Ricketts is not on there.
Well, yeah, but everywhere, all of that stuff on Instagram is at Ricketts Man. On Facebook, just as Ben Ricketts.
Cool.
If somebody goes to that from this, I do ask, if I do not know them personally, that they go to the page Ben Ricketts and like it. Because there's a tendency, especially when I'm on tour, when I release something, for people to add my personal page because there's no name distinction between the two.
Yeah.
And because of like Facebook's algorithms against pages, I tend to just accept people. But I don't please, if you find me on Facebook, find the page if I don't know you.
Yeah. Hashtag like Ben Ricketts, not hashtag friend.
Don't add me. If we've met once, even in passing, add me. But if it's just for the music, just please like the page.
Honestly, I think you and we were Facebook friends for a while. I think before we met in person, but we knew a lot of the same people.
That's what I think it was. It's like if I don't know who added who, but it's one of those things that we had enough mutuals, and like I saw pictures of you playing, so like we've probably been in the same place several times.
Right, and that's how Memphis operates. Like, my friend Mike and I, we talk about he does things on Instagram, like lives on Instagram, but like Memphis music scene operates on Facebook. That's what I've realized. Like all of the shows I've played and everything I've booked has been through Facebook. I think I've booked one show that was through email.
I've also learned with all the social media stuff that social media reach often has no immediate. Like a while back, I did the whole killing Elvis thing, where I had like a week of posts about how I was going to be taking him.
I remember that.
10 people came to that show. Or there was the post about the show I played last night had like 170 reactions, and like it was like there 5 people came. It's like I've learned that there's no direct correlation, but like that all started because years ago I was still in Oxford. And me and some friends at work I brought it up. I don't know how it came up. We were talking about Mecha Godzilla. You ever seen Godzilla versus Mecha Godzilla? So I posted, do y'all remember Godzilla versus Mecha Godzilla? I was like, that was kind of weird. And then below, I was like, by the way, I'm playing at Lamplighter tonight. And the post blew up. This was like about a year ago. I was like, I'm just going to start finding more and more extreme ways to present that same pattern of very obvious, just weird bait and switch. And it's gotten to the point now where it's just
it's fantastic. It's gotten to the point to where there was one time I read something. It was like this really weird off the wall thing, and I was surprised to not see your name. And then, by the way, I'm at P8H tonight. It was really weird. Well, very cool, man. Dude, this has been a pleasure.
Thank you. I've had a good time.
This has been a fantastic conversation. Very insightful. I'd love to have you back sometime too.
Absolutely.
Any closing parting thoughts, man?
I don't think so.
Cool.
Just the new record will hopefully be out in the next couple months.
Oh yeah, that's what. Yeah, gotta promote the record.
It's
my bad.
It's all good. It's about I'm about 4.5 songs in recording wise, other than a few embellishments and things here and there. As always, I'm kind of writing and recording side by side. Like I'm not really writing a whole record and then tracking it. Like I'm doing it very as I go. So. At the pace I've been working, at the pace I normally work, I'm expecting it to be out by the summer.
Cool.
I won't make any definitive statements to say, but
that's cool, man.
There should be a new record out in the summer.
Cool.
Fingers crossed.
You heard it here first, folks. Ben Ricketts is going to release a record. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
Well, cool, man. Dude, thank you so much. Once again, everybody, this has been the Modern Working Musician. Thanks again to Ben.
Thank you.
Y'all have a great day.